Good morning, everyone. Thank you for choosing to spend your valuable time with us this morning as we discuss what we need to know about developing relationships with the Department of Defense. We're going to start with a brief explanation of who we are, review our purpose and agenda today, and then we'll introduce our guest. I would like to ask you to please keep your mics muted while we're talking until you have a question. Also, if you do have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat. Griffin St. Louis is going to be monitoring our chat this morning. If you'd like to ask the question yourself, just let him know, and we'll pause to make sure you can get your questions answered. We'll also pause at the end of both sets of conversations we're having today. If you saw my email, you know that we have been very fortunate to add a couple additional guests this morning. So the other thing that you can use the chat for if you want to is you can put your contact information in there if you want to be able to network with people after this event. We do suggest people put information in when you register for the meetup. There's an opportunity to tell us who you are, tell us what you're working on. Everyone that attends can see that, so it gives you an opportunity to kind of promote yourself and what you're doing. So DefTech it's called the Maryland Defense Technology Commercialization Center, and we are a program of the Maryland Department of Commerce. We're federally funded through the Economic Development Administration, and we help businesses connect with the resources and facilities and intellectual property at the DoD labs in the state of Maryland. And we do that by going out and meeting businesses, obviously online at the moment, which has been working very, very well, learning about what they're working on, what kind of challenges they're facing. And then we search through nearly 2,000 patent database that we have to see if we can find solutions in that database. It's also an opportunity for you to look at new technology that's being developed and see if you can't make use of it in another way. We also help you connect through other types of relationships, cooperative research and development agreements. It's some things we're going to talk about today. So today we're talking all about acronyms, a lot of acronyms. Being with the DoD most of my adult life, I'm very familiar with many of them, but it always seems that there's a new one popping up at some point. So 2 weeks ago, we had a meetup on SBIRs and STTRs. And those are two tools that business can use to fund their product development in cooperation with some federal agency. If you missed that, I would encourage you to go onto our YouTube channel and you can just search for Taking Technologies to Market. We did record that. It's full of all kinds of great information. So a lot of different agencies use SBIRs and STTRs, and one of those is, of course, the Department of Defense. It's a great way to get your foot in the door. It's a great way to partner and collaborate to help the DoD solve some mission essential issues that they're having, respond to some of their needs. So aside from, gaining kind of a deep understanding of who you're working with, and we always encourage you to do that. We talk a lot about customer discovery. We talk a lot about making sure you fully understand your market, making sure you understand your customers and partners. You also want to understand kind of the nuances of back office reporting, some of the back office work that you have to do when you're working with the Department of Defense. We're going to talk today about a lot of that, not everything. We're not going to go into detail. Obviously, we have about an hour for this event this morning. But we're going to talk about what those reporting expectations are, and we'll start off with SBIRs and STTRs, which are relatively minor. That's not a terribly onerous thing to have to do. Plenty of businesses do that, and they manage it quite well. But the first thing you need to do before you apply for an SBIR, STTR, is to get into the System for Award Management, also affectionately known as SAM. Which is kind of challenging to navigate if you've never done that before. But if you intend to apply for an SBIR or to sell products or services or partner in some way with the DoD, you're going to need to do that. Next, we'll talk about a few different relationships and agreements, such as cooperative research and development agreements. We'll talk about patent license agreements and other transaction authorities. And before we move on to some record keeping and some things you need to be aware of for auditing purposes. So before I introduce our first guest, I want to share that yeah, I'm very excited because we did add to our discussion today. Earlier last week, I believe, the Navy announced, Secretary Gertz announced the addition of 6 new tech bridge locations across the United States. And we're going to learn what that is and why that matters for business. And we're going to find out what, how to access this resource and how to use this as a tool to interact with the Department of Defense, particularly the Navy in this case. So we're very fortunate that we have 2 of the directors of those tech bridge locations. First of all, 2 of them are in Maryland, and both directors are on this morning. So we're going to hear from them a little bit later on. So to help us understand the DoD's expectations, we've brought in some experts who do this all the time, work with business all the time, make sure that they are set up in legally safe ways, appropriate ways. And so we brought in 2 experts from McCarter and English with specific expertise in government contracts to help us make sense of this. And I say 2. One is going to have to leave us shortly, so unfortunately, but that's okay because we have both Ethan Brown and Alex Major with us this morning. So Alex is the co-chair of the Government Contracts and Global Trade Practice Group for McCarter and English. He has a deep understanding, among other things, of procurement law, compliance, accounting, and I would just like to say that I liked Alex before we met because we're both Air Force veterans, so go Air Force. You can see somewhere in the background my Air Force flags. Sorry, Navy friends. And Alex is also a former intelligence officer. So most of this morning, we're going to get to spend with Ethan Brown. So Ethan is also with McCarter and English. He has deep expertise in defense. He understands the industry, as it were. He provides counseling. He advises companies in a wide variety of industries, from healthcare and construction to high tech on compliance and other matters. So we're going to start first with Ethan and get us started this morning. So good morning, Ethan.
Good morning.
I tied this a little bit to our last meetup. And as I said, we talked about using SBIRs and STTRs as a funding opportunity for product development. And we talked, among other things, we just touched on a little bit the need to understand the government's reporting requirements.
Right.
I'm going to share your slides so that people can see, first of all, your contact information, which is very important. So everyone that's on today, if you would like a copy of these slides, email me. You can email kimberly.mozingo@deftechmd.com. There'll be a slide at the end this morning that has my email address, and I will ask Griffin, if you could, actually, Griffin, could you please put that in the chat so we have that, everyone has that information. So one of the things I wanted to do, Ethan, and thank you for doing this, is can you just kind of give us an overview, a little bit of the SBIR program, so people that weren't able to join us 2 weeks ago have a basic understanding of what that's all about?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So we're starting out in the SBIR, the Small Business Innovation Research Program. There's also the close relative of that, the Small Business Technology Transfer, the STTR program. We're going to be basically focusing on the SBIR portion. Some people say the more popular portion of this, and it's been about 30 years. Essentially, agencies with R&D budgets over 100 million have to set aside about 3% of their budget to finance these SBIR programs, with basically the goal of getting small, innovative companies to work with federally funded projects with agencies. 2 of the biggest out there are the DoD and the HHS. They account for about 75% of the total SBIR funding out there. DoD is probably the biggest, and they've had some really great successes come out of this program. There's 3 phases. First is phase 1 and we're going to concentrate essentially on the DoD right here. And the DoD sends out like announcements through their the DISP website, and they're going to look for proposals, grant applications, and they're going to for certain R&D projects. And if you receive an award, you submit a proposal to evaluate. If you receive an award, It's up to $150,000 and about 6 months in duration, although they can go over that 6 months period with the proper channels. If there's potential from the phase 1, we go into phase 2. Once again, you have to submit a proposal. It's not as open-ended. You submit a proposal about your phase 1 research and its potential for commerciality. The awards under the phase 2 up to $1 million in 2 years in duration. And once again, it could be 3 years, up to 3 years. And if it shows the potential for commerciality, we move into phase 3. And this is an interesting phase. We won't go into incredible detail on these. The funding is actually provided by the private sector here with the goal of commercialization. The phase 2 goal is more working from your basic R&D to getting a prototype, and then phase 3 is actually getting in the commercial market.
And that is something that we talked a lot about in our last event, and it is challenging to get to that phase 3 level. But this kind of information is important to make sure people understand that, you know, there are these phases. There's different opportunities in each phase, and phase 3, you by the time you get to phase 3, you should have done your homework and understand what's going to be required of you in order to be able. Yeah,
it's not a not a high percentage to get to phase 3, but there are some. There've been some real interesting successes on this to commercialize some of these technologies.
Yeah. So let's talk about you know, what are some of the reporting requirements when you're in that very beginning stage, the phase 1, looking at a phase 1 maybe for the first time. What are some of the things that companies need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things to vary on the reporting and record keeping. It's basically whether the award is a grant or a contract. The DoD is actually a contracting agency when it comes to SBIR. So you will actually receive a contract with all of the clauses, terms and conditions, what you would see if you were a government contractor. And for instance, the National Science Foundation, the NSF, is actually a grant-oriented SBIR. So there's different record-keeping requirements depending on whether you're getting a grant or a contract, which is something you need to know if you're working with an agency outside of the DoD. And if it's a contract award, for instance, with DoD, the type of contract also plays a big role. For instance, the cost type contracts, where it's not a fixed price, it's accounting for costs. You have to have an approved accounting system. So there's all types of different requirements depending on the actual type of contract you receive. Also, depending on the deliverables, there's going to be different reporting requirements. Contracts have specific deliverables for the work performed under the contract. The contract deliverables, you know, there's going to be reporting requirements depending on what stage you are. There's intermediary, and final deliverables such as progress reports, interim reports, new technology reports, and project summaries. At different points, different milestones, when you're actually conducting this research, you have to submit different reports as your progress, what you think, and you know, the key is going to be at the end, especially for phase 1 of the SBIR, your progress reports, and also at the end of phase 2, as to whether you're going to actually make it to phase 3 and any of the subsequent phases. And also, on the other hand, besides the progress reports, there's also going to be the invoicing, which is accounting for costs during the process, how you're spending the grant money, how you're spending the contracting money, what equipment, how many people you have on their timesheets, and all that record keeping makes a very big deal, especially if you're in a cost type contract. So we actually recommend keeping all the invoices and copies of your project deliverables for up to 6 years after the end of an SBIR phase. And that's more oriented to a typical government contract. Again, we're focusing on DoD here, which is a contracting agency under SBIR. The 6 years is the statute of limitations for a government claim. So it's good to keep all that information together in case, well, fingers crossed, something happens. For that backlog.
Yeah. That doesn't, I don't think there should be anything terribly surprising in there. If you are, receiving money from an organization, any organization, to do something, you need to be keeping good records on, your accounting system and your finance. You need to keep records on the work that you've done, and people that have done consulting before know that, you've got to have all this information together and keep it together just in case. You just never know. But before a company can even get to the point where they're applying for an SBIR, and we spent a good bit of time 2 weeks ago talking about the commitment. We had Neo Gamo on, and Neo has a company that just recently won an award, and she talked about her experience of going through a program that TEDCO has to be able to apply. So there's a serious time commitment that a company makes when they're going to apply for an SBIR or STTR, and we emphasize that because it's not something to just all of a sudden decide you're going to jump into. And part of that is understanding that you have to be registered in the System for Award Management, or SAM, which I've done several times. I have a couple of companies registered in SAM. I just recently did it again last year, and it's it's a fun process to go through. So there's a lot to think about. There's a lot that you should be prepared for before you get in. And granted, Sam does have some really good training videos, I think. But with the terminology being new to a company that's never done this before, it just gets confusing. It gets a little overwhelming. So can you talk about some of the things that we need to consider, especially from a legal perspective? Like, what do we need to get together? What kind of information do we should we have together before we hop into registering in SAM?
Yes, and as Kim said, there are some great videos on the sam.gov website, training videos. So if you're new to the process, they also have some great sheets, not only videos, but actually sheets you can print out and go over to give you an idea of some of the questions they're going to ask and some of the documents you need. So there is that resource for contractors new to it. And just in general, what do companies need to consider before registering in SAM? The first thing we tell them is know your company information. And that sounds self-explanatory, but you need to know everything from your taxpayer ID to your company's legal structure. Is it an LLC? Is it a corporation? Is it a proprietorship? Your number of employees, which is important, especially if you're going to be claiming to be a small business, whether you are a small business or you are one of the socioeconomic programs that the Small Business Administration has. For instance, the Women-Owned Small Business, the Service-Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business, whether you qualify as one of those statuses. And that's a whole nother area we could probably have a separate presentation on, but it can be a tricky area. And also your DUNS, your Dun and Bradstreet number. This is actually going to be phased out. They have the unique entity indicator, the UEI. Used to have a Dun and Bradstreet number to actually register in SAM. That is going to be phased out. So I'm not sure if that's, they're working toward that earlier in this year, so it's going to actually change. Another interesting part and a very important part is in your company, you have to designate one person as your SAM administrator. That person will actually submit their email address, and all notices from SAM will actually come to that email address, and that person will be responsible for updating SAM on an annual basis and keeping everything current. Now you have to have a notarized letter. You used to have to provide that when you're registering for SAM. It's actually been changed. So after you register for SAM, you have to provide a notarized letter on your company's letterhead designating this person, and you have to have that within 60 days of your registration. Another big area is the reps and certs, representations and certifications. This is 10 to 15 pages of representations and certifications your company is going to make, everything from small business certifications to whether anyone's been business, hopefully not, has been been accused, charged with a felony. And You could actually, I think if the slide's up, I actually put you can actually go to the sam.gov help site, actually print these reps inserts off to give you an idea of what they're going to ask. The important part we stress here is when you make these certifications, you need to make sure they are correct, accurate, complete. You can be penalized for a false representation, false claim, if any of these are incorrect on your SAM website, excuse me, on your SAM registration. And last, we say start the process early. It can take up to 6 weeks to actually it's rare to take that long, but it's a multi-week process to actually have not only go through the registration, but to have it approved. And once you get it approved, you're in the clear. But you do also have to remember to keep this updated at least annually. And if anything changes in your business, you're acquired by a large business, your business structure changes, number of employees, you're no longer a small business, you need to make sure you update SAM. And on the last note, if you're in the SBIR program, not only do you have to be registered in SAM, different agencies require additional registrations. For instance, DoD, you might need a Dun & Bradstreet number. You have to register with the SBIR, STTR website from the Small Business Administration. And then there's some agency unique systems. For instance, in DoD, you have to register with the Defense Innovation Portal. And depending on the agency, for instance, DOE has about 6 other websites you have to register with. Depending on the agency you're working with on the SBIR program, there might be some additional registrations besides SAM, and that's the real takeaway here. There might be some other hoops you have to jump through, but once you're registered and you're in the systems, especially with SAM, that's really the big hurdle.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Did we have any questions on any of that yet? No, we don't have anything in the chat. So there's a lot to think about. Consider. I really appreciate the information, and I'm sure everyone else does too. So one of the things that's important to point out about SAM is just like so many other things like this, there are people who will charge you money to do this. Don't pay for this. You can do this yourself. Right. Yes. The state of Maryland in particular, because we are so heavy in Department of Defense here, there are a ton of free resources businesses can use. There's, the small business development centers, there's one in every community. They're very easy to reach. They're incredibly knowledgeable about things like this. The state offers classes, the SBDCs offer classes, the Procurement Technical Assistance Program also offers classes, and that is an organization, a state organization that helps businesses with registration and how to work with the Department of Defense in kind of another capacity. So thank you for that, Ethan. That's incredibly important.
And the takeaway, as Kim.
Oh, this is Alex.
I'm sorry.
I'm off my call and return. Just want to let you know. But I have something to say as well. But go ahead, Ethan.
Oh, I was gonna highlight that Kim's exactly right. This is not it's a lift, but it's not a heavy lift, and any business owner should be able to do this. The government doesn't want to prevent you from registering on here, so don't fall for some of these companies out here. It's not worth the money to pay them to do it for you. And considering the legal implications of not having the correct information on there, it's best for you, the company, the company owner, or your company team to do it yourself.
Yeah, but I'm not saying certainly that people shouldn't work with an attorney. I'm not saying that at all. There are, of course, points in every business where businesses need to work with an attorney. They have to have people that they trust. But actually getting yourself registered in SAM is not something that you have to pay something else for. So you want to add something, Alex?
Yeah, well, sorry for missing. I was listening on one ear and not the other. But kind of going to what both of you all are saying, I completely agree. The big issue here, again, is recognizing that while the Department of Defense is a great source of business, it is one that is, rife with concerns. And it's really a matter of making sure that you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's, and doing like Ethan said, making sure that your registrations are correct. That is fundamental. It's easy necessarily because you're just talking about what you are and what your company is. And if you have questions about this question or that question, as you print out the SAM registration, that's where you can, if the Google machine can't tell you the answer, contact an attorney. But it is something that is really important and does take time. So often we see, and I hate to harp on sales staff, but because of the lure of dollars that are at the at Meade or Pax River or what have you, the sales staff gets very, very eager to sign all these contracts and go, 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 go. But there really is this necessary requirement of making sure that all your books are in order and that you are properly prepared to work with the government, because they can be a very, very, very demanding, they are a demanding mistress. So you need to make sure that you're very clear on what your company is able to do, what it's not able to do, right? So, identify those weaknesses of, we probably can't do that. Because if you're saying, we probably can't do that too many times, it's really not worth the risk, because the risks can include the False Claims Act, like Ethan said, but that can also include personal liability and personal risk. So there are, again, it's a double-edged sword. A lot of potential, a lot of opportunity, great customer that's always going to be there. But if you don't do it right, you could go to jail. So it's always that balance.
Right.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. And of course, when we take off our business hat and we put on our taxpayer hat, we want the DoD to be holding people accountable, right? We want them to be making sure that what the money that they're spending for these products and services is being used the way it's supposed to be used. So that was a great conversation. I feel like we could dig into this. As Ethan said before, there are countless branching off conversations that we could have.
Oh, right. We could have 5 or 6 other meetups on SAM registration.
Yes, we could. But we're going to move on. A few weeks ago, we did a World IP celebration, which you can also find on our YouTube channel if you're interested in that. And we were fortunate enough to have Barry Datloff, who Barry is on with us this morning as well, from the Army's Medical Research and Development Command. And we had Matt Jones from the Chemical Biological Center. So the Medical Research and Development Command T2 function is at Fort Detrick in Frederick County, and the Chem Bio Center is at APG in Harford County. And they talked about how they work with businesses, and they're partners with DefTech. And so we help, what DefTech focuses on, helping companies connect with the DoD labs in the state of Maryland. Mm-hmm. So most of our clients are interested in either licensing patents, the IP from the lab, and or entering into CRADAs. So can you talk about that? Can you help us understand what companies need to be aware of? Well, we can start with PLAs, patent license agreements. I'm using acronyms.
Yes, starting with PLAs, patent license agreements. These are typically with research performed at DoD labs, result in inventions that may have potential commercial value. So the government entity, the DoD entity signs a patent license agreement with a commercial entity to commercialize these inventions. Or license it for commercial, these inventions for commercial development. And this is a very high level discussion. There's many things that go into a PLA, but these are some of the bullets, some of the things you see a lot of time that parties need to know about and consider when they're entering into a PLA. One of the first thing is the extent of exclusivity. Excuse me. An exclusive PLA, it's limited to one company, has the right to work on this for commercialization. Partially exclusive, multiple companies, maybe 2, maybe 4, will actually have the PLAs, the ability to work in parallel on commercializing this invention, and the non-exclusivity. It's anyone who signs up can actually work on this commercialization. And this is important to think about, you know, how many people do you want to compete with on here? Is this a commercialization that you alone might have the ability to do, or is this going to be multiple people? And it's something to think about when you're entering in a PLA. Territorial extent, is this going to be limited to the U.S.? Is this going to be a worldwide PLA? If it's a worldwide, we always recommend that you contact counsel in foreign countries to make sure you're not going wrong with any of the local patent laws. And the scope of rights needed to commercialize. Sub-licensing is something you think about. Is there going to be sub-licensing to a third party to help commercialize? And improvements to patented technology. Is this going to be an improvement patent, or is this just a regular patent? Royalties and payment terms. This is a consideration. How do you want the royalties and payment terms negotiated? Is it going to be a lump sum payment? Is it going to be interim payments? Is it going to be a payment upon commercialization? And kind of the theme we've been talking about here, the reporting and record keeping. What type of reporting and record keeping do you want your company to be subject to? Is this PLA? Government entity might have a different idea of the record keeping, rather than if you're just a commercial entity, you might not be used to the government record keeping. I think the takeaway here is when you're negotiating a patent license agreement, especially if you're a company that's not you know, very experienced with working with a government entity, is understand the terms from both a business perspective and a compliance perspective, and what you have at this PLA. What are some of the considerations from a long-term and a short-term process, and decide if it's right for you.
Okay, let's just go right into CRADAs, because frequently we have a lot of deaf tech clients that are either interested in you know, using the IP, the intellectual property, you know, getting a patent license agreement, but they also want to work with the experts who develop that. And one way they can do that is with a CRADA. Can you talk about CRADAs a little bit? I do have that slide up now.
Okay, sure. Yeah, the Cooperative Development and Research Agreements, once again, it's another acronym, the CRADAs. This is for both subject inventions and non-subject inventions made in the course of work. Subject inventions are basically describe what I call the SAL, the statement of work, what the purpose of this contract, this research contract is. So typically they have to first report to the governing agency. You've come across this invention. It's somewhat expected, but sometimes they have to decide whether it's patentable. The party that actually, well, quote unquote, discovers the invention usually has the first option to retain title or ownership if it's made by any of its employees. If that's declined, then the other party has that option. Another area is the non-subject inventions. These are inventions that just happen to appear, well, I should say appear, happen to be discovered in the course of progress, but they're not anticipated by the statement of work. It can be owned by either the agency or the contractor, depending actually the terms of the CRADA, and your CRADA should account for non-subject inventions. Now, if the agency owns the non-subject, the rights to the non-subject invention, the contractor actually has to secure a license to the invention to commercialize. And you know, one of the big takeaways here is the government purpose rights, and this is something to keep in mind if you're working under a CRADA. Is regardless of the invention is classified, whether it's subject or non-subject, the government actually does retain some rights, a non-exclusive, irrevocable, paid-up license to the invention to have it practice around the world on behalf of the government. So, you know, government's going to retain some rights under the CRADA to these inventions.
Okay, I saw we had a question pop up, so I'll ask. Rob, did you want to ask that question? Do you want to unmute and ask that question, or do you want us to ask for you?
If DoD and a university enter into a CRADA, what additional opportunities potentially downstream could reveal themselves or could be worked toward in order to create funding for funding for projects or programs and then eventual centers. So I'm working with a university that is in that position, and we're just trying to see how a CRADA could be that initial seed that we could build on top of.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think the best way to describe that is, as you said, a good description of CRADA as a seed to some of this, to bring these inventions to the forefront, whether it's a subject or non-subject invention. I think that's the government recognizes that potential for these inventions, and especially DoD is very aware of commercializing these. And a CRADA can be a first step to commercialization, whether it's a PLA down the road or something to commercialize this subject invention, and the CRADA could be the first step in that chain. So I think a lot of it would depend on the agency and what they're interested in, and whether the invention or discovery under the CRADA has commercial possibilities. There's, as I said, a PLA or some other type of agreement to bring that to potentially commercialize and bring that to market. So the CRADA would be the first step in that.
Yeah, this is Alex. I'll just add one of the things that we've seen in the past with CRADAs is exactly what you're describing. They really do create a great opportunity to get to know that particular agency, and especially for universities, because you have the intellectual workers there, if you will, but then you can actually leverage the government as well. Now, as that progresses through time, as that relationship builds, as you grow and identify more opportunities, then you might be in a situation where you're maybe outliving or getting beyond what the CRADA was intended to do. And that's going to require a little bit more in terms of identifying specific needs, specific opportunities that you're developing with the business, or excuse me, with the government, or the universities doing with the government. So in that respect, that's when that relationship turns less like the CRADA that Ethan's been discussing, and you can start moving more into a government contract relationship and a contracting relationship to be a lot more specific. And the reason you want to do that is under CRADA, the IP rights are very soft and very much in favor of the government. But then as you progress, there might be specific items that you wish to commercialize, or perhaps are specifically intending to create for the government that would be your IP. And not necessarily the government's. So, and that includes the university as well. We do a lot of work with a lot of universities up and down the East Coast in that respect, and in creating those types of centers, not only as independent, or not only as part of a university, but also as independent research labs and independent research centers. So it can become very creative, and it can become very lucrative for the universities to create those sort of spin-offs in a corporate capacity. Okay,
that's good information. Second question on top of that, I think it's a little bit cleaner, is what's the difference between a CRADA and an educational partnership agreement with the university?
So that's a different kind of relationship, and that's a great question. We can actually address that. Is that something that you can address quickly? Let me get another expert in on this. Rick, do you mind talking for a minute? And I'm just going to preface this with, unfortunately, we are so running out of time. We're going to cover OTAs very quickly, right. But I do want Rick to address the EPA CRADA issue.
Sure. Generally, obviously, EPAs are with universities. CRADAs can be with any non-DoD entity, university, industry, or small business. And the main, I would say, difference is EPAs don't necessarily contemplate the generation of new IP. So I think, as an earlier presenter was saying, the CRADA framework addresses IP. EPAs think of more of an MOA between a lab and a university. Often you see them around STEM activities. So just defining what the relationship's going to be and addressing potentially liability or something happens in the performance of the stuff. So
thank you, Rick. I appreciate that.
Generally, I would say the bottom line, though, if you're doing research with a lab, I would definitely steer towards the CRADA. That's what that agreement contemplates, that kind of relationship.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. Now, I'm going to put a little pressure on Ethan to go through
Sure.
the discussion of OTAs fairly quickly, because I do want to make sure we have time. And we actually scheduled this until 10 o'clock, but I know for a lot of people sitting for an hour and a half just makes you want to pull your hair out. So OTAs I know are kind of new, and I know with the pandemic especially, it's been very visible that DoD is really ramping up their ability to access business-driven innovation. They're really looking at different ways to partner, and we're going to hear from Rick and Krista a little bit later about that, about one of the kind of innovations that the Navy is looking at. We are going to completely skip over FAR-based contracting. I'm sorry to do that, but I think that is probably a week of hour-and-a-half sessions minimally.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
If you could I'll put your OTA slides up. I know you have two.
Sure.
I'll start with the first, what is an OTA? And then we can go right into who can access an OTA, who can use that.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll keep this quick in the interest of time. But yeah, essentially OTAs, other transaction agreements, they're legally binding instruments, but they are not your traditional procurement contract. They're not going to have the FAR and DFARS clauses when it comes to DoD. They're going to have much greater speed, flexibility, accessibility. DoD has really leaned on these recently as a way to get non-traditional defense contractors use their innovative technologies and get them to the battlefield or the warfighter quickly, and not get stuck in all the typical government red tape and compliance that actually might keep these companies from becoming defense contractors or working with the DoD. So it's great. It's great for companies that are not used to government contracting. It's a much more streamlined agreement. It's not going to have all of the compliance in a typical agreement, and it's with the goal of getting technology commercialized quickly and in the hands of people that need it. There's two types of there's two types of OTAs: prototype projects and research. By far the most popular is the prototype projects. Is once again taking innovative projects, innovative technologies from commercial entities, and working with the government to get that to the battlefield. So who can actually enter into one? There's two types. These are for prototype projects. The awardee is what they call a non-traditional defense contractor or a small business, and then whether and the second part is the awardee can actually be what's considered a traditional defense contractor, but it has to be working with a non-traditional defense contractor. And usually there's a cost share involved in this. So there's two different parts there. How to enter into one? There's two main ways to enter into one. One is the broad agency announcement. This is what you're going to see on the Fed Biz Ops, usually from DARPA, DUIX. We'll actually have present essentially a problem and request white papers, proposals. It's run like a typical competition where they select the one or two, the best ones of the best proposals for either a more formal proposal, a product demonstration, some type of pitch. Then they work, and if you're selected, then they work on the actual OTA agreement. Another popular approach, and one that's actually been gaining steam, is the consortium approach, and we've had a number of these consortiums pop up. Some of them have up to 1,000 members, and they're usually divided by certain technologies. IT will have one, and there'll be one for cybersecurity, the different offshoots of that, but it's a collection of companies. You actually sign a consortium agreement to join. And for instance, the Air Force will contact the consortium with an issue. The consortium acts as members for white papers. White papers are submitted. The consortium picks the best ones, sends them to the Air Force, and then the Air Force will actually, if they like them, they will actually sign an agreement, an OTA with the consortium, not with the actual consortium members. But the members of the consortium can work on the OTA. So you might have an instance where there's 3 or 4 different consortium members working on a problem. I think that's in a nutshell all I had on the OTAs. I know we're skipping the last slide on the the DFAR is FAR-based contracting. But,
yeah.
Questions on that?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to ask everyone is if you want more information on one of these topics, like Rob had asked about the EPAs, which is a very niche thing with universities, let us know in the comments. Shoot me an email. We're more than happy to pull together the right experts to answer your questions about this, because these are important topics and they're important opportunities for everyone. We want to make sure that you have the ability to access these opportunities. So Ethan and Alex, both of you, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm sorry we had to rush through.
No.
I'm glad we got questions. I think that every single word you said was important to everyone. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on. In Maryland, of course, as I said, we do have this robust DoD ecosystem of support within the state. We've got SBDCs with people have expertise in defense contracting, because that's just what we do here. One of the things we do here, we do lots of other things, but it's really critical to business and to our local, our state economy. So we have lots and lots of great tools. There's a Maryland Defense Network that the state set up, the SBDCs. Again, just an awful lot out there. So as I mentioned before, the DoD has been just innovating different pathways for collaboration with industry and academia, so that they can meet warfighter needs. And I think, with my entire adult life being spent with the Department of Defense, I do tend to look at, making sure that this is meeting warfighter needs. And with 2 of my daughters also serving in the Air Force right now, meeting warfighter needs really has deep meaning for me. So as a business and you're looking for solutions, just remember, again, know your customer. That's their focus, right? They want to solve warfighter needs. So on that note, I think our timing could not have possibly been better in securing our next couple of guests. As I mentioned earlier, Secretary Gertz announced 6 new tech bridge locations across the United States. And I'm very happy to say that 2 of those 6 are here in the state of Maryland. So we're going to dive into what that means. And we are joined by both Krista Michaelis, who is the Capital Tech Bridge Director of Naval X, and the Naval Innovative Science and Engineering Program Director at Naval Surface Warfare Center, Carderock. Good morning, Krista. How are you?
Good morning, Kim. I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
And we're also joined with, who you heard from a minute ago, Rick Tarr, who is the Southern Maryland Tech Bridge Director at Naval X. Rick, thank you for being here this morning. And I'm going to say very quickly, and I'm not, he's not paying me any money for this, but I know that, I know Rick, because Rick and I have worked together in one form or another since 2007. I've watched him, grow his career to the point where he's running the show and tech transfer down there. And he's done a lot of really innovative things. He understands OTAs, EPAs, PIAs, all the acronyms very, very well. PLAs, CRADAs, I could go on. And he's, I've watched him push in the right way to innovate and use these tools appropriately, and figure out how to get people to step out of their comfort zone, because it's not just, Rick or Krista sitting in their office making decisions about who does what. They've got these huge legal teams. They've got contracting professionals that they work with. And there's a lot of need to be able to collaborate within your own organization. So thank you both for finding the time to talk to us this morning. And let's just start with, if one of you could tell us, what is Naval X and what are tech bridges?
Yeah, sure. So good morning, everyone. Like Kim said, my name is Krista Michaelis. I'm the Capital Tech Bridge Director. So Rick and I will tag team answering some of these questions this morning. So the 2018 National Defense Strategy was a call to the Department of the Defense to find new ways to harness innovations in private business and academia to better serve and protect our country. So as a response, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, Secretary Gertz, established Naval X in February 2019 to expand the Department of the Navy capabilities in these areas. So the goal of Naval X is to connect both internal Department of the Navy and external Department of the Navy partners to increase awareness and access to best practices and technologies. At the same time, tech bridges were stood up to connect the Department of the Navy, to be connectors, right? To create this network, to connect the Department of the Navy workforce to the external, local, regional innovation ecosystem. So last year, 6 tech bridges were stood up across the country. And then last week, Secretary Gertz announced 6 more. The main points of the tech bridge are to create and maintain these strong regional and national networks of innovators, and to be a super connector for these innovation activities that are ongoing. And for you all, it allows a single point of entry into the Department of the Navy ecosystem in your region. And then also, we're doing all of this. We really want to lower the barrier of entry for our external partners, and we're doing this through leveraging off-base locations for a lot of these interactions and events that we'll be holding in the future. So for the Capital Tech Bridge, we're going to be using a space that currently exists in Alexandria, Virginia, called The Garden. That's where the Naval X headquarters is. They just finished a really large renovation. It's about 4,000 square feet. They have a large event space where we can hold Capital Tech Bridge events. And there's also a machine shop attached to it if we do have cooperative research projects that we want to leverage that facility to, tinker and do some prototyping activities.
Thank you. So I know the Navy, of course, is kind of laser focused on warfighter needs, providing the right solution, and doing it as efficiently, as effectively as possible. And it sounds like this tech bridge network of networks kind of approach is just another way to collaborate and deliver innovation. So most of the people that are associated with DefTech, the businesses that we support and are taking technologies to market, members are involved in product development, prototyping, they're manufacturing, they are manufacturers, they do prototype type development, a wide variety of industries. So I would bet their first question to you is kind of, what does this mean for business? How does this designation make it easier for business to provide solutions, to collaborate on product development, or just get to see you and meet people? I want to say in person, but we're going to have to wait for that.
Sure, Kim, I can take that one. So as Krista mentioned, we're also having a space outside the fence line here at Pax River and our Airport Innovation District. And really the Tech Bridge is trying to lower the barriers for businesses, non-traditionals, folks that haven't normally done business with the DoD, to access OTA consortiums like a previous speaker talked about. And then also the traditional T2 mechanism, so patent licenses, CRADAs, and it's really an opportunity, hopefully, to lower the barriers to accessing the lab and the scientists, engineers that are behind the fence line to solve warfighter problems, whether that's, again, through traditional T2 mechanisms or through an OTA consortium to prototype. It's really, as Krista said, a connecting network.
Mm-hmm. I did notice before you go and I go on to the next question, do you want to share with everyone? I saw you put it in the chat window, but we have a new consortium in Southern Maryland, started last year. You want to talk just for a second about that? Sure.
The NASC, or the Naval Aviation Systems Consortium, is designed for prototyping and support to NAVAIR, the Naval Air Systems Command, and it has the full range of technologies within it to support naval aviation. to include traditional stuff like air systems, unmanned air systems, but also a lot of the business stuff. So big data, machine learning, AI are all within the scope training within the NASC. You can get more information. Like you said, I put a link in the chat. You can get more info on the Naval Aviation Systems Consortium. We're releasing a statement of need probably at least once a month to that consortium. And again, like you said, we're trying to attract non-traditional. So this is a different way. You're not getting into beta SAM or ESAM, and hopefully the barriers to propose your good ideas to the Navy are lowered, so it's easier. And that's really the goal of the consortium.
It's been encouraging to see what's going on in Southern Maryland. I know that Leslie Taylor, the director of NOC-AD, mentioned several years ago that she doesn't know what small businesses are out there, or not even small, but what businesses are innovating, and how does she get to know them? So it's encouraging to see that while she had the question, now we're actually doing things to make that easier, that this has been elevated to a level of importance. And I was encouraged to see NASC, and I'm very happy that we have tech bridges. And I know that's a very local Southern Maryland thing, but it's exciting to see this.
Yeah, and one point that to your statement there, the other thing that we're really excited is the tech bridges are a national network. So as much as it's an engagement here in the local Southern Maryland region, if there are businesses that don't fit either Krista's Warfare Center up at Carter Rock or here at NOC-AD, we can connect you with a rather large and growing tech bridge network that includes Newport, Rhode Island, and undersea warfare, Keyport, Washington out in Seattle, also torpedoes and undersea warfare, a major fleet concentration center at San Diego for networking, and then also down in Norfolk, Hampton Roads area. And then there's one coming online potentially in Panama City, Florida. So it's not, think of it too as if you're looking for a way to introduce your technology to a warfare center or SysCom, or find relevant warfighters that can give you customer feedback and you do customer discovery, reach out to Krista and I will try to connect you up with the appropriate tech bridge. So think of it, not just, it's connecting those regions to Southern Maryland too, hopefully. So if you're a business in Southern Maryland, it's bringing in other requirements, and as well bringing our requirements out. So
yeah, thank you. It's that network of networks. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to add one more piece, and I saw a couple of questions pop up kind of related to it. So examples of different events we'll be holding at the Tech Bridge off-base locations are like focused technology events about current funding opportunities that exist for industry and academia. So, the SBIR call comes out every 6 months. There's OTA problem statements that government folks put on these OTA consortiums. There's different O&R challenges that are out all the time. So I'd like to get, government, industry, and academic folks in these focused technology areas, depending on whatever the topic is for SBIR or the OTA or a different funding challenge that's out, into the garden or this off-base location, hosting tech talks from all of these folks and talking about these different funding opportunities that are available for folks to submit proposals to.
Thank you. So that is very helpful to know this. So right now, of course, we're talking about these in-person events, and of course, most of us have had to flex, and we're thoroughly enjoying doing these online meetups. Actually, this has been a lot of fun. When the three of us spoke last week, we talked about how hard it can be for businesses to keep up with everything that's going on. With this as a kind of network of networks approach, as Rick mentioned, this doesn't just connect Southern Maryland to, give business a way to connect to Southern Maryland. It gives businesses in Southern Maryland a connection to businesses at Carter Rock, outside the state, across the entire Navy, but also to their DoD partners as well. So there's collaboration within DoD. And when I say that, I'm talking about the Navy can collaborate. It's an easy pathway for communication between the Navy and the Air Force, the Army, the Marines. So my original question was, how do businesses keep up, and how is TechBridge going to provide will it provide a kind of one-stop shop for businesses to know what they need to know?
Yeah, so like you said, Kim, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So, Rick and I and the other tech bridges are, well connected in the government innovation space, and trying to bring that to our local and regional ecosystem. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but we would like to connect a lot of these things going on. So for example, SoftWorks, which is an innovation group for the Special Operations Command, last week's launched Tech Tuesdays, where industry folks with, revolutionary technology can come pitch their technology to the Special Operations Command and all interested government partners virtually every Tuesday from, I think it's 3 to 5 o'clock. So things like that, we want to make sure that folks in the NCR and folks in Southern Maryland see these opportunities, because there are so many to engage with the Department of the Defense and the Department of the Navy. So yeah, I don't think we're a one-stop shop just because there's so much going on, but we would like to highlight, and bring to light a lot of these opportunities that exist for industry and academia to participate in.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to one more question that I have for the two of you, and then we have a couple questions in the chat that I want to make sure that we get to. So with DevTech, of course, our DevTech clients need to have a deep understanding of their end users and customers, and we always push that. They participate in accelerators. They receive mentoring from us. There's collectively, Gary Evans, who is the director of DevTech, has done mentoring through the I-Corps program. We've done just a wide variety of support to our clients, helping them understand their customer. And when we spoke last week, I think Rick mentioned that it's been nearly impossible for businesses that are supplying warfighter solutions, getting their products or services, their solutions to the end users, to actually speak to them to find out what life is like for them and what their challenges are. Can you talk a little bit about how Tech Bridges will help bridge that gap?
Absolutely. So I completely agree. I've done the I-Corps program, and one of the key things is talking to your end customers and validating that the product you're developing is relevant and addresses their needs. So one of the aspects of the Tech Bridge will be engagement in fleet exercises. So here at Pax River, we're doing a naval fleet exercise where we're inviting. So the Navy is going to be paying for the ranges and infrastructure for this experiment and fleet exercise. And then we'll be inviting small businesses that have innovative solutions to demonstrate their technologies and get warfighter feedback right there on the spot. As well as one of the new tech bridges of the 6 that were stood up is down in Norfolk, Hampton Roads. And one of the major concentrations of that tech bridge is providing access to warfighters for small businesses to speak with them and get feedback on their innovation and products. So those are 2 ways to be able to access relevant warfighters that can give you real-time feedback on your products.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I'll one other thing, Kim, there is an event happening at one of the tech bridges in South Carolina, the Palmetto Tech Bridge. And I will post a link to that experiment, and small businesses, if their technology, really any industry partner, can submit to participate if their technology fits within the scope of that experiment. So I will post more info of that in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Rick. So let me ask you a question, since we just had this long discussion about requirements, reporting requirements, and things like that. Before a company participates with any kind of a Tech Bridge program, do they need to be registered in SAM?
No, no. So if you want to come in and pitch or talk to Chris or I or any of the other 12 tech bridges? No, absolutely not. You can come in and talk to us and engage. Depending on what type of agreement that may be an outcome of that, you will have to register with SAM, but certainly not for the initial engagement.
That's fantastic. I think that's really important, and it makes it provides a level of comfort for businesses that are moving in here. One thing I will say is that, you know, it's very challenging for those of us that have been in the DoD industry for so long to recognize that we're using acronyms or we're using terminology that people don't understand. And so when we talk about exercises, it's literally just kind of a war game scenario. It's a practice for a potential situation that the Department of Defense might come in. They do them all the time, and the purpose is to get better at what they do. And now it sounds like there's an opportunity for business to be there as well and participate. So as Rick said, he's got some links in the chat, and he's going to put some more in there. One of the questions we have in the chat, and this is going to be quite a challenge because the first part is easy, the second part is going to be hard. Can either one of you provide us with maybe an example or two of how a small innovative company has used tech bridges? Have they accessed it? But here's the challenge: do it without acronyms.
Yeah, I can start. I got a good example. So we had a customer within the naval aviation community that was looking for a cargo unmanned air system. So think a drone that would deliver water and potentially other supplies not to exceed roughly 25 pounds from one location to the other. So through our tech bridge and our partner called Impacts, which I can post a link to, we did a prize challenge. So we posted the criteria for the system, how much weight it had to carry, and how we were going to grade how far it would go with that cargo, and then did a fly-off out in Yuma, Arizona. As part of that prize competition, we did do an OTA with the 2 winning companies at the culmination of that event. So one of the great things about the OTA authority is that you can use non-FAR-based forms of competition, whether that's a prize challenge or other merit-based competition. So it allows you a lot more creativity and flexibility about how you conduct the competition part of an OTA.
Okay, thank you. Krista, do you have any quick examples you could share?
Yeah, well, I also wanted to talk about, right, so through a CRADA, we can do joint research and joint technology development, which, you know, we are super interested in working with small businesses to do joint technology development. So we can leverage each other's subject matter experts. We can leverage each other's facilities. That's a big part of it too. So there's also a work with private party agreement where small businesses and external folks can have access to the Warfare Center unique facilities and personnel, you know, obviously for some sort of an appropriate fee, making small businesses and external partners aware of what kind of facilities exist at all the warfare centers is a big piece to this too. So for example, you know, up at Carter Rock in Bethesda, Maryland, we have the David Taylor Model Basin, which is one of the largest ship model basins in the world. And it's a test facility for the development of ship design. So, you know, just educating our external partners on what facilities we have, and then also what facilities exist in the local ecosystem that we could potentially leverage through all these different agreements that exist, I think is really key to a lot of this.
Thank you. Both of you failed with acronyms, but I was hyper-focused. No, it can't be helped. I mean, it's much easier to say CRADA than Cooperative Research and Development Agreement, and it's a good kind of reminder for everyone that this is why we have this event, just because there's a lot of terminology that can be at first off-putting. But as I mentioned, in our state, There are tons of resources to help businesses figure all this out. And also, as I mentioned, the DoD has been very innovative about how they're working with businesses. So hopefully it should feel a little bit less intimidating. We have a couple other questions. I'm going to throw them out there real quick. One question is about whether or not there's funding with Tech Bridges to engage in collaboration regionally. Do you have funding at the moment, or is the funding just to allow you to get established?
So in terms of funding, great question. So since the Tech Bridge is helping to connect NavAir with small businesses and non-traditional, we do have funding. And really, that funding is in program offices to solve problems. So, which is a big deal. I think you'll see challenges where potentially there's no transition partner, meaning the DoD is putting out a challenge as market research, but once the challenge is complete, there isn't a program of record or a end customer that is going to buy in quantity and go into production. So one of the things that we are focusing on is making sure that if we do have a prize challenge or a competition, that the program office has identified transition funding, so that if you're a small business and take some risks and do investment on your own, that the Navy is committed, if you successfully produce, to try to transition the technology. So we'll make that clear in the OTA announcements and in any of the prize challenges that we put out. So I'll say that there's not, to your point, there's not specific funding for the Tech Bridge or for me personally to go out and fund R&D efforts, but there's certainly a lot of funding available within the program offices to do innovative work. So.
This is so great that the two of you could join us. I know it was the last minute. You know, I heard Secretary Gertz. I was there for the live announcement. It was really exciting to be there and listen to everything that's going on. I was so happy to hear that we have both of you in Maryland, and you know, that you're friends of DefTech. So thank you for that. I'm looking forward to this. I think one of the things I want to ask is, you know, maybe we do some more of this. Maybe we bring you on again and we do a little more detail, because I know that both of you have done OTAs, you've done CRADAs, you've done PLAs. It's your lifeblood. It's what you do. Trying to push the technology out to business to provide commercial use, and also bring it back into the Navy to solve warfighter problems. So maybe we look at doing another event to talk more about all those opportunities. This is probably our longest meetup. I thank everyone for staying on this long. I want to turn just for a second to the purpose of DefTech and why the Department of Commerce set this program up. So our purpose, again, is to help businesses make use of these extraordinary resources, these lab resources that are available in our state. Maryland is home to 78 federal labs. That's more than any other state. It's twice as much as the next largest number of labs in the state, actually. And most of those state-of-the-art facilities, the highly sought-after expertise, the cutting-edge intellectual property, that's all available to help businesses grow. So from a business perspective, you're looking at, well, what's in it for me? What does this do for my business? If you marry that with solving an actual warfighter need, it's just an awesome win-win opportunity. So what we do is help connect businesses to the labs. With that, we want to make sure that people understand how to read a patent, not just how to read the patent, how to understand it, how to consider it for potentially licensing. We're going to run through an example of some technology that's currently available for license from the Army Research Lab. We're going to be joined by the president and founder of RPM Tech, which stands for Rapid Prototyping and Manufacturing. And he's going to walk us through a couple things to consider. When you look at a patent, how do you know its manufacturing potential? How do you know how you're going to develop that into a prototype? So Cyrus is going to walk us through some of that. We're going to talk to Griffin St. Louis as well. So Griffin is a program manager with DefTech, kind of about what do companies need to know and what does he need to know about your company before he begins that personalized IP matchmaking service that we do, where we look for specific IP that can help solve one of your business problems. So mark your calendars, that's June 2nd. As we go out, I want to say thank you everyone so much for joining us this morning. We're excited that you were able to be here. We hope that we were able to provide you with useful information. I hope you have a wonderful week. And of course, as always, wash your hands, stay inside, social distance, all that good stuff. And here are links to find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, our website. There's my email address, one of my email addresses, contact information for Ethan, and the LinkedIn for reaching Krista and Rick, and also the Naval X and Tech Bridges page. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Krista. And thank you, Rick. And we will see you all in a couple of weeks.